Welcome back, everyone. So this is the final presentation today, and with us we have Lars Jaatun, who will tell us about threat modeling tools, and he will present his comparison of the Microsoft threat modeling tool with the OWASP contender, OWASP Threat Dragon. So please go ahead, Lars.
Thank you. So, as Martin said, I'm Lars. I'm a student at the University of Stavanger, and I'm presenting our comparison between OWASP Threat Dragon and Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool. So, to develop secure software, security needs to be integrated into the software development lifecycle and not just as a pit stop before deployment. However, even with a conscious focus on security, it's difficult to catch all vulnerabilities in a system, and therefore you need to pick your battles. And one way to choose which battles to pick is through threat modeling. Threat modeling is a process that allows you to map out your system and allow you to determine what parts of your system needs the most attention. To do threat modeling, one way is through Dataflow diagrams. Dataflow diagrams are a way to visualize the attack surface of your application or system. With the symbols you can see on the slide, you create a visual representation of the data flow throughout your system. And together with a threat mnemonic like STRIDE, for instance, which stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege, you're able to categorize your threats to your system in order of importance. Drawing these data flow diagrams out by hand is a lot of work. There are horror stories about these data flow diagrams taking up whole floors of offices. And when you have diagrams that big, they're a nightmare to maintain. A change in your program or system can involve you having to redraw the whole thing, yeah, it's difficult to maintain. So one solution to this problem is through threat modeling tools, and these threat modeling tools, the ones that I'm talking about, they have the ability to let you create a data flow diagram in the program and also generate threats automatically for this data flow diagram. So first off, I'm talking about Threat Dragon. Threat Dragon is an open source project under the OWASP umbrella. It's still per se in development, but it's still usable in its current iteration. Threat Dragon is made with a focus on having a simple user interface so that it's very easy to integrate into your pre-existing software development lifecycle, or yeah, it's supposed to be very easy to adopt. Here you have a data flow diagram made with Threat Dragon. You can see all the different elements shown in the data flow diagram slide, and there, that what you see here is what you get. This is all the different elements, and this diagram is made up is a diagram for a simple web application, and you have the entity on the left, the external user, a trust boundary between the external user and the web server and application server, and another trust boundary between the database and the data store. So to generate threats for this data flow diagram, you need to click every element and generate threats individually. And these threats that you generate are generic according to which threat mnemonic you choose in ThreatDragon. You have the choice between Stride, CIA, and Linden, which I won't go into. So for instance, if I select the web server, I can generate, I select generate threats, and then I get a list of threats according to, for instance, Stride. And that would give me, I have an example here on the next page of a threat report generated. So here you see, on the right, you see a generic spoofing threat, and that's the, well, S is the first letter in Stride, first threat generated. And what ThreatDragon does is that it gives you a very basic description, but it wants you to elaborate. It's the developer's role to build on this, to create a better description, a better to change the severity of the threat, etc. Yeah. Now over to Microsoft threat modeling tool, or Microsoft TMT. It's developed by Microsoft, one of the biggest software companies in the world. And compared to TMT, it's a mature program. It has a few more years on its back than ThreatDragon. Already, it's in heavy business use. It's pretty popular among businesses, and what Microsoft uses to pull in businesses is its automatic threat generation. TMT has this very different approach to threat modeling compared to ThreatDragon. It has these intricate stencils with many different elements instead of the generic entities and data stores, etc., that you find in ThreatDragon. They even have specialized stencils for instance, the medical sector with elements for instance, an MRI machine. Here you see an example data flow diagram of the same application that was the same web application as with ThreatDragon. On the surface level, it looks pretty similar, but each and every element here is different, though some of them might look similar. And with the use of these different elements, Microsoft TMT can generate a substantial threat report for you at the click of a button. You don't have to go through each element like with ThreatDragon. Then you end up with something like this. And in contrast with ThreatDragon, the main goal is to try to weed out the redundant threats that are irrelevant. So when we came to our conclusion, we found that we couldn't really declare a clear winner between the two, and the main reason for that is their wildly different approaches to threat modeling. Microsoft is a Windows-only program that is developed by one of the largest companies in the world, and this means that there are a lot of resources that available to go into TMT. Potentially, a lot of developer time can go into that, and the way you generate threats, the way TMT works, is it wants to be it wants to do most of the threat modeling for you, so that you can focus your attention elsewhere, or not spend as much time on threat modeling. Whereas Threat Dragon is an all platform program. They even have a web app for Threat Dragon, and it's an open source project, which means that it's available for it's a lot easier for the developer community to potentially affect change in the application, as well as Threat Dragon not being bound to any company, whether a company sees any value in the program. And where Microsoft TMT wants to take a lot of the burden off the developer, the Threat Dragon wants you to really focus more on security and really spend your time there, and it wants you to help you do that in a more sensible manner than just drawing out huge pieces of paper or something similar. So while writing this paper, we found that there was no documentation, no actual documentation of effectiveness in reality using these tools. There was one report named Effectiveness of Microsoft TMT, but this the paper only the conclusion of the paper was that students had an easier time finding threats in an application using Microsoft TMT, and who wouldn't? So for that reason, we propose to conduct a survey across software companies to find out who uses it and what difference does it make. We tried to conduct a survey for this paper. However, the results were not statistically significant due to a low response rate. However, the results were interesting nonetheless, seeing as not everyone used a threat modeling tool and preferred to use an ad hoc solution through discussions or something similar. So therefore, the new study would aim to design metrics to evaluate usefulness or potentially improvement in security in a company if they choose to adopt a threat modeling tool, and this all to understand the value of threat modeling tools in an industrial context. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Yes, we have plenty of time for questions, so please go ahead and use the Q&A feature. And while we're waiting for questions from the audience, I'd like to just start off. And if you take Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool as an example, isn't it a bit intimidating for the user if you draw a simple model and you get this huge list of threats?
Yeah, and that's, as I said earlier, that's a thing you could see as an issue with TMT, and that's it really does overwhelm the user with threats, and if you might say that it's easier to use TMT because it generates a lot of the threats for you, but at the same time it might overwhelm you completely if you're not experienced. So I really don't see a difference in that regard when to using TMT versus Threat Dragon. I think you need some security experience, software security experience nonetheless.
Thanks. So we have a question from the audience, and so here's a question. Since your work compares Microsoft TMT and OWASP Threat Dragon, did you look at any other threat modeling tools?
Well, no, we didn't. And this is this is potentially, well, already Threat Dragon has a lot of similarities to other threat modeling tools like Mozilla C-Sponge, but we chose to compare Threat Dragon and TMT because these were two seemingly polar opposites, two very different tools. So we chose these two to gain a as broad as possible understanding without too much clutter. But comparing different other threat modeling tools would be interesting.
Okay, thanks. So we still have, there's another question. Another anonymous attendee wants to know, is there some limitations of both these threat modeling tools, and what were your findings on that?
Well, I'd say that both of these tools are in general well designed, but the limitations the limitations comes to what you prefer as a developer. Well, so for instance, Threat Dragon, it only gives you generic threats, and this is perhaps more difficult to work with for some, because you have to do a lot of the heavy lifting yourself in regards to narrowing down exactly what kind of threat or such things. And yeah, that might be seen as a disadvantage. But on the other hand, while Microsoft TMT gives you very, very detailed reports, it makes it very easy to perhaps overlook something or spend time on something that isn't actually an issue. It generates a very, very detailed report without actually doing any advanced filtering that is better suited for humans to do. So yeah, it depends on what you as a developer want and need.
Okay, so if you ignore the automatically generated threats, would you say that both tools work the same in terms of adding manual threats?
Well, yes. Yes and no. Well, while you can add manual threats, it's well, yes. It's a difficult question because the data flow diagrams for TMT and Threat Dragon, they might look similar, but they're pretty different. But the adding of the threats themselves, if you add one single threat to TMT, I guess that would create the same, be similar to just adding a single threat in TMT, but no, in Threat Dragon. But it's hard to say. TMT is a lot, no, Threat Dragon is a lot more, it's adapted a lot more to adding individual threats than TMT. That's final answer.
So would you say that there's so you mentioned that in Microsoft TMT the various elements are more specific, so that you have a separate, whereas in Threat Dragon you have just an entity which is a process, whereas in Microsoft TMT. That process can be a web server, it can be a database server, it can be any number of specific things. But did you look into the specifics, so sort of the so-called stencils of that, how these are created in Microsoft TMT?
No, we didn't actually. Well, if your question is whether we tried playing around and creating bespoke stencils ourselves, then the answer is no. We are aware of the ability to create them. For instance, as I said in the talk, the medical template, that is, we know it exists, but no, we didn't play around with it. But I've through hearsay, I've heard someone working on a master's degree creating one of these stencils. So I suspect it's not as easy as it sounds.
Thanks. So here we have a question from Cyril, and he is wondering about if these threat modeling tools either generate or allow you to recommend or specify countermeasures to counter the threats deduced.
Well, yes. So in Threat Dragon, I can perhaps go back to the slide for this. In Threat Dragon, you have the option to specify the mitigation yourself. The generic one is fixed, not very helpful, I guess. However, TMT normally gives you as you can see, it's a very well described. They have a very detailed description of the threat, and they give you suggested countermeasures. So I think you can edit this, but TMT gives you a pre-generated one.
Right. Okay, we still have a few minutes left for questions. So if anybody wants to jump in, that's still possible. And I'm not sure if I can think of any more to ask myself. So failing that, I think maybe we can just, and there are no further questions. And this is, after all, the final talk of the day, and people are possibly hungry, but I doubt if there are any that are more hungry than me. So we will then thank you for your presentation, Lars, and of course remind you that everyone, that there is the forum where you can potentially discuss further and ask further questions if you suddenly remember a question you wanted to ask the moment we close this session. But that's all for now. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully see you, many of you, tomorrow.